In a move sending shockwaves across North America, Prime Minister Mark Carney is openly defying the White House. He's refusing to delay the opening of a $6 billion bridge that President Trump wants shut down. And this isn't just about a bridge. It's a high-stakes standoff over trade, tariffs, and control that threatens to completely derail North American commerce. The political storm erupting between these two leaders is more than just a headline. It's a fundamental fight for economic leverage. President Trump sees the bridge as a bargaining chip, a tool to force Canada's hand before critical trade talks. Prime Minister Carney, on the other hand, sees it as a matter of national integrity and sticking to a deal. At the heart of it all is the Gordie Howe International Bridge, a massive 6-lane marvel of engineering connecting Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan. For years, it's been sold as a symbol of unity, a vital new artery for the continent's busiest trade corridor. But now it's a flashpoint in a rapidly escalating trade war. What the screaming headlines aren't telling you is that this dispute is a proxy war for the future of the North American economy. It touches everything from dairy farmers in Wisconsin to auto workers in Ontario, from digital taxes to Canada's growing trade relationship with China. Today, we're doing a forensic breakdown of this unprecedented confrontation. We'll analyze the motives, dissect the economic fallout, and explore what comes next in this high-stakes game of geopolitical chess. It all started, as it so often does, with a late-night post on Truth Social. President Donald Trump declared he would not let the Gordie Howe Bridge open until Canada treats the United States with fairness and respect. He announced his intention to start negotiations immediately, demanding that the U.S. be fully compensated and even suggesting America should own at least one-half of this asset. The post was a classic Trumpian ramble, touching on everything from Canadian dairy tariffs and boycotts of American liquor to a bizarre, unsubstantiated claim that Canada's trade talks with China would somehow lead to the elimination of the Stanley Cup. The response from Ottawa was swift and firm. Prime Minister Mark Carney publicly shot down the president's demands, calling them a fantasy and making it clear that Canada would not be bullied. He was polite but direct, stating there would be no delay. Carney's office followed up with an unmistakable message. The Prime Minister would rely on logic and agreements, not bluster. This set the stage for an epic test of wills. On one side, you have Trump's aggressive America First nationalism, using any and all leverage to rewrite trade deals. On the other, Prime Minister Carney's calm, analytical approach, rooted in the belief that international agreements must be honored. This isn't just a political squabble. It's a clash of ideologies playing out on the world stage, with a $6 billion piece of infrastructure hanging in the balance. To understand why Prime Minister Carney is digging in his heels, we need to do a forensic breakdown of the deal behind this bridge. What they're not telling you in the frantic headlines is that Trump's demands for compensation and ownership completely ignore the financial reality of the project. Here's the kicker. The entire $6.4 billion construction cost was financed by the Canadian federal government. Let that sink in. Canada paid for the whole thing. This was all part of a landmark 2012 agreement between Canada and the state of Michigan. In this unique deal, Canada agreed to front not only its own share, but Michigan's portion of the costs, too. Michigan's contribution would then be paid back to Canada over many years from its share of the bridge tolls. The ownership structure is also crystal clear and has been for over a decade. The bridge is jointly owned by the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority, a Canadian Crown corporation, and the Michigan Department of Transportation. There's no ambiguity. This is exactly what Prime Minister Carney told President Trump in a direct phone call after the social media threats. Carney explained to reporters that he reminded the president that Canada had paid for the bridge, that ownership was already shared, and that both Canadian and American steel and workers were used to build it. This directly refutes one of Trump's key complaints that the bridge was built with virtually no U.S. content. So when President Trump demands full compensation or to own at least one-half of this asset, he's demanding ownership of something the U.S. federal government didn't pay for and for which a clear binational ownership agreement already exists. Carney's refusal to play ball isn't an act of aggression. It's him defending a legally binding contract. The White House has since doubled down, with officials suggesting the president could unilaterally amend the bridge's operating permit. But legal experts and Canadian officials see this as pure political posturing, not a credible threat. Canada's position is simple. The deal is the deal. The bridge was a joint project from the start, a symbol of cooperation, and Ottawa refuses to let it become a political pawn in a game of revisionist history. This whole bridge fiasco isn't happening in a vacuum. It's the opening shot in what everyone is calling the great USMCA renegotiation. The United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, the deal that replaced NAFTA, is up for a mandatory joint review this year, and President Trump is signaling he'll use every ounce of leverage he has to squeeze concessions out of Canada. The Gordie Howe Bridge has become his biggest, most tangible bargaining chip. By threatening its opening, he's holding a critical piece of North American infrastructure hostage to a much broader list of trade grievances. So what's really on Trump's hit list? First and foremost, Canada's supply management system, which protects its dairy, poultry, and egg farmers with massive tariffs. U.S. dairy farmers, especially in swing states like Wisconsin, have hated this system for years, and breaking it down has been a cornerstone of Trump's trade agenda. He explicitly linked the bridge to these tariffs in his social media posts. Next up is Canada's digital services tax, which hits the revenue of giant tech multinationals, most of which are American. The White House calls this a discriminatory tax, and they want it gone. Then you have long-standing issues with the Bank Act, which limits U.S. banks operating in Canada. But maybe the most provocative issue for the president is Canada's independent trade agenda, specifically its ongoing talks with China. Trump has threatened staggering tariffs on Canadian goods if Ottawa makes a deal with China, seeing it as a betrayal of North American economic solidarity. For President Trump, it's all connected. The bridge is leverage for dairy. Dairy is leverage for the digital tax. Everything is a negotiation. His strategy is pure maximalism. Create crises on multiple fronts to keep your opponent off balance and force them into painful trade-offs. This puts Prime Minister Carney in a ridiculously tough spot. Critics say that while Carney's calm, logical style is admirable, it might not be a coherent strategy against Trump's transactional chaos. Analysts suggest Carney needs to build a coalition of the willing inside the U.S. itself, getting premiers to work with governors, business lobbies to coordinate their messaging, and Canadian diplomats to bypass the White House and appeal directly to Congress and industry leaders who depend on cross-border trade. This is a political chess match where the board is a lot bigger than just two leaders. So what does this standoff actually mean for the auto industry in Ohio or the price of your groceries in Ontario? The economic fallout here isn't abstract. It's immediate and it's huge. According to a detailed analysis from the Anderson Economic Group, a respected Michigan-based firm, delaying the opening of the Gordie Howe Bridge would trigger direct losses of up to $7 million a week. Let's break that down. The Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority, the Canadian entity that financed this thing, would lose about $5 million a week in toll revenue. Without that money, there's no way to start repaying the massive $6.4 billion construction loan, putting the entire financial burden right on Canadian taxpayers. The other $2 million in weekly losses would come from taxpayers in both countries to cover the operating costs of two brand new, fully staffed, but completely empty customs plazas. Those are the direct, can't avoid them costs of letting a multi-billion-dollar asset just sit there. But as the Anderson Economic Group warns, these direct numbers are just a fraction of the concern. The real economic damage would ripple across the entire continent. The Windsor-Detroit Trade Corridor is the single busiest commercial land crossing in North America. Something like 10,000 trucks cross the border here every single day, carrying billions of dollars in goods. This crossing is the beating heart of the North American auto industry's just-in-time manufacturing model, where parts show up at assembly plants exactly when they're needed. The current crossing, the nearly 100-year-old privately owned Ambassador Bridge, is already struggling to keep up. It's an old 4-lane bridge that simply can't handle today's trade volume efficiently. Failing to open the new 6-lane Gordie Howe Bridge would create instant severe bottlenecks. Experts warn that any significant disruption here could cause auto assembly lines in Michigan, Ohio, and Ontario to shut down within hours. The fallout would be massive, costing jobs, jacking up prices for consumers, and damaging the competitiveness of the entire auto sector. That's why business leaders like the Detroit Regional Chamber and Michigan's own governor are stressing how urgent it is to get this new bridge open on time. In his attempt to get leverage for the Rust Belt, President Trump is threatening the very supply chains that keep its factories running, a high-risk gamble that could backfire spectacularly on the American workers he claims to be protecting. We are at a critical tipping point. Prime Minister Mark Carney is holding the line, betting that logic and prior agreements will win out over raw political pressure. President Donald Trump is upping the ante, convinced this bridge is his key to unlocking major concessions from Canada. And caught in the middle is the economic stability of the North American market, with industries, workers, and consumers on both sides of the border bracing for impact. This is more than a diplomatic spat. It's a defining moment for the Canada-U.S. relationship. The road ahead is foggy. Will this escalate into a full-blown trade war with new tariffs crippling key parts of the economy? Or will back-channel diplomacy and pressure from the business community force a resolution before the damage is done? Two questions are dominating the conversation in Ottawa and Washington. Who will blink first? And what happens next? We want to know what you think. Is Trump's bridge gambit a masterstroke of deal-making or a reckless move that will hurt the American economy? Is Prime Minister Carney's refusal to budge the right strategy? Or does Canada need a new game plan? Let us know your predictions in the comments below. This story is moving fast and we'll be tracking every twist and turn. To get in-depth analysis that goes beyond the headlines, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell.